This is Emily Hall with the Oklahoma Oral History Research Program at Oklahoma State. Today is Thursday, April 5th, 2018, and I'm here at the Scissortail Literary Festival in Ada, Oklahoma, interviewing Bill McCloud for the Deep Roots Oklahoma Authors Oral History Project. Bill, you're an award-winning author and teacher, adjunct professor of American History at Rogers State, a recent inductee into the Northern Oklahoma College Hall of Fame, Vietnam vet, and we're just getting started. So thanks for taking the time to talk with me.
Sure, thanks.
Where were you born and where did you grow up?
Same place. I was born in Ponca City, Oklahoma, and I lived there the first 27 years of my life. But I was born in Ponca City. I'm the oldest of 5 kids. My father was a Southern Baptist minister and is still noted in K County for being one of the few preachers in the 60s who would go to the black churches and preach. He didn't think anything about that. One of those preachers who might break out into song at any moment, even though he didn't have a very good singing voice. You didn't want to sit in the front row because spit would fly when his face is red and he is preaching. And you didn't need to get excited when they had the altar call at the end because you never knew how many times he was going to have the pianist keep playing. He'd keep saying, "I know there's somebody out there wanting to come forward," And none of this is to be considered negative about my father, just reflections. At some point, he turns holiness and begins preaching in tongues, and the Southern Baptist Convention asks him to return his ordination papers, so he does, and then he just carries on. So I'm a preacher's kid, 5 kids. My mother was a licensed practical nurse. It was in her obituary, and it was found officially when she took the state test to become an LPN. She made the highest score on the state test that had ever been made, and that's part of her obituary. One of the most intelligent people that I've ever known. Ponca City, Oklahoma, and it was a pretty cool place geographically because we're right in the middle. You've got Wichita, you've got Oklahoma City, you've got Tulsa, and as high school kids that would get a car occasionally, we could go to any of those 3 big cities and have it made. So everything was there available to us. But I have great memories. My name on the birth certificate is Billy. I'm not a William. So it's interesting, when I went to Pryor to begin teaching for the first time in 1975, I wanted to make sure they called me Bill as part of the deal about standing in front of a classroom and all of that. So, but my name on the birth certificate is Billy, and my dad's name on the birth certificate was Billy. But the reason I'm telling you that is still kind of funny. Anytime I go back to Ponca City to visit, all the people there call me Billy. Yeah. And the people in Pryor and elsewhere call me Bill. So that's kind of one of those funny things about how time affects whatever.
Yeah. How would you describe your mother's personality and your dad's personality? What were they like?
Oh my gosh, I don't know. My dad was a Navy veteran, a combat veteran of World War II, and he was hip. He was a preacher who never did have a preaching job that paid enough that's all he could do. So he worked at Continental Oil Company as a rigger, R-I-G-G-E-R. They don't even have the job anymore, as a rigger, which means he did work up way high. That was his job. Whatever the work was, if it was high, he would go and do that. So he ended up actually retiring from Conoco and was still a preacher. But he was red-faced, and he made sure that we all got to church Sunday morning, Sunday evening, Wednesday evening, vacation Bible school back when it was 2 weeks. But then he would wear a leather jacket, what they used to call motorcycle jackets.
Yeah.
So he's this preacher, but he's kind of this hip preacher. He also didn't mind taking the gospel to where the people were, and a lot of times that might be a local bar. And so he was known and lost respect among some people for going into bars and having a glass of beer while he, talked to the people there. Whereas my mother and I were extremely close. And she was, let's get real personal here. She was 17 when I was conceived, so she and I were pretty close in age. But growing up, we liked the same music, the same books, the same television shows. But we shared a lot of things in common. And I actually lived with her until I was 27, and then went to Pryor. But I mean, there were differences between them, and they ended up not being. I guess, are we supposed to tell everything in things like this? We just tell what we want to tell.
Whatever you want the public to
They
know.
they ended up getting divorced at a later time. I was actually in the military when they got divorced. And so you've got that going on. And then later, my dad died, committed suicide. It was found out later he had some kind of pathological, things going on. So he killed himself. And then my mother actually died of smoking-related illnesses. She, a nurse, most intelligent person I've ever known, but enjoyed smoking.
Yeah.
And actually said, if smoking shortens my life, I'm going to enjoy the life I have, which people can look at from time and say, well, that's not saying much for your grandkids and things like that. But everybody, in a sense, kind of has to look out for themselves. To me, the only really sad thing about that is I talk to my students about this, is why my mother started smoking. My mother did not start smoking because of peer pressure or somebody daring her to do it or something like that. No, she's smart. She's in control of what's going to happen. My mother started smoking because she worked in a factory, and back at that time, the only people who got breaks were people who smoked, because everybody knew a smoker would get jittery if they didn't have a cigarette after a while. So naturally, they had to have a break to keep their level of work up where it should be, but just smokers. And so she began smoking so that she could get a break at work. And she was one of those people that just got hooked then and didn't want to give. I mean, it's all totally her fault, but it's still. I see some American history, labor movement history in that story.
How about your grandparents?
I was fortunate to be able to have 4 grandparents virtually through high school. I mean, during the important times. Now, I understand you want people with you all your life, of course, but during my important growing up times, when it's great to have siblings and friends and parents and cousins and aunts and uncles, and also grandparents, because everybody brings different things to you. I had the grandparents, and they, one set of grandparents, the grandfather was retired, and they had a farm out at the Osage County, and I was living in Ponca City. So summers, and probably at least 3 different summers, I got to go out and live with them for basically 2 months at a time. I mean, watermelon patches, the outdoor toilet facilities. You had to go outside to that. But I had a radio and would listen to St. Louis Cardinals baseball and read my Tarzan books. I mean, that was a world unto itself. It was only available because my grandparents were around, and because they wanted me to be there as much as I wanted to be there. It's a family joke in a way that my grandma, that I'm talking about on that side of the family, a family joke that she seemed to pretty seriously favor me over the other kids, or especially she favored the boys over the girls. The family joke is one time for Christmas, she gave me a full cowboy outfit with the boots and the hat and the gun and everything. And my sister, right below me, got a pair of underwear. Was her gift. So I've been lucky to grow up with a mother that was very close to me. This grandma, the grandparents on the other side, just the same. But on the other side, my grandfather was, I was maybe 14, 12 to 14. was killed in a one-car accident right outside of town. And they actually, somebody, I guess, came and notified us, or before they went to my grandmother, or they went to my grandmother and she calls us. But anyhow, the reason I'm telling you that is, with that grandfather's death, my father, so we've got the family together. I mean, it's been hurried because it was so unexpected. And so my father is the one that's called to go and identify my grandfather's body. I mean, no family member's done that. My grandmother hasn't seen him. My father is the one that's chosen to go to do. So he goes to the door and opens the door and then turns around and says, "You're old enough, why don't you come with me?"
Wow.
And my immediate response was to look at my mother and see what she said. And she said, "Okay, go ahead." So I went with my father, and I, one of my poems is about that experience, and it kind of makes the idea is, I cannot tell you one single thing that my father and I discussed going there and coming back. I don't remember any of the word, but I'm sure it was something pretty significant that my dad was putting down inside of me. So it's become a part of me without me knowing. And then he said this, and this. Great experience with grandparents. I just feel so sorry nowadays with a lot of children that don't have that experience. And now everything changes when you become older, when a person becomes older themselves and then starts looking back at periods of time. Because I can remember my father, when I got out of the Army, my father seemed to me like he was an old man. But I'm like 25 years older now than he was at the time. It just, when you're younger and you're looking at somebody that's older, they oftentimes seem a whole lot older than what they actually are. So both of my parents died separately when they were 60 years old. So that, I just, time.
So you mentioned that you liked the Cardinals, baseball. What other hobbies did you have as a kid?
I was a voracious reader. I was, whatever would allow me to stay indoors. Mm-hmm. I was not an outdoors guy. I'm noted for in the spring and summer, whenever I could get away with it, I would wear long sleeve shirts. I just wouldn't wear short sleeve shirts. I didn't want to go outside because it'd be hot and it'd be kind of sticky, and the ground is dirty. And if I can stay inside, I can open up my book and I can read my book and do whatever I want to. So I was a big reader. Reading was a big thing. The book that I consider my all-time favorite book is Treasure Island by Robert Louis Stevenson, because I remember the effect it had on me when I first read it. And then I went through the Hardy Boys, and then I began my interest with real major serious fiction came through what's called Classics Illustrated comics. Today they'd be called graphic novels, but they were comics based on great works of literature. I mean, that's where I got interested in Moby Dick and the Three Musketeers and Ben-Hur and Frankenstein, and even Treasure Island was there. And what that showed me, that was my gateway to the real books a short time later. I was really young. I was 12 years old when I was reading The Three Musketeers and Moby Dick. I remember that. But it had been the Classics Illustrated that had shown me how great the stories were and how emotionally charged they were. And that led me then to realize that I'm going to have to slog through it. But hey, there's something to these.
Mm-hmm. How old were you think, when you were reading those, the illustrated?
Oh, the Classics Illustrated? Yeah, I was... I always put 12 years old in the middle. I don't know. I was like 10 to 12.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I was a kid. Nobody thought about anything about somebody reading comics, and yet they weren't the kind of comics that my buddies were reading.
Right.
They weren't reading. They were reading Archie and stuff like that, which is okay. But I was fascinated by this Wuthering Heights. Wuthering Heights,
Wow.
my God.
Yeah.
And the Classics Illustrated are just great. And my all-time favorite teacher, Dr. Ed Coyle at Northern Oklahoma College, I'm one of the people that can point to a specific person and say, because of that teacher, I became a teacher. Dr. Ed Coyle at Northern Oklahoma College in Tonkawa. And I was majoring in English, but I took his first class, and he taught like humanities and civilization, not specifically Western civilization, not specifically American history and stuff. But I took a first class with him and fell in love with him. And it wasn't so much that I wanted to be like him, I wanted to be him. But one of the things that he did, he taught a course one time, and for the literary parts of it, brought in and allowed us to use Classics Illustrated. Not to dumb things down, it's the opposite. It's to look at the artwork and then to actually look at the book and make comparisons. But that was one of his classes. But another one of his classes, Western Civilization, we came into his class, and the first day, and we've got these big books, and they're brand new, and they smell great. I always loved being a student. I would sit on the front row, and I'd be the guy who, if the class was dismissed, I might say, "Oh, teacher, you forgot to give us our homework," or something. I got beat up a lot in high school for that kind of thing. But in his class in college, his Western Civ class, we went to it the first class period. He had us open the book to the last chapter in the book. Not the last page of the book, the last chapter in the book. That's where we started. And that whole semester, we went through Western civilization backward. So you looked at something, then you looked at what had immediately come before that. And then immediately, and you have to,
those connections.
you have to tell your brain that you have different expectations from it here, and for your brain to pay attention because there's more required here than what you've been expecting. But he endorsed the Classics Illustrated comics, and I collected them. I was a collector. Baseball cards, I couldn't play baseball, and I was afraid of the ball hitting me. But man, I had a baseball collection of baseball cards like you can't imagine. I collected for a while and really read surfing magazines. I really enjoyed the way the articles were written, the pictures. Surfing magazines, I went through a phase of year and a half where that was my thing, was surfing magazine, which is interesting because I didn't know how to swim and had no interest in getting into a swimming pool. I would not get into a swimming pool because what's the first thing you have to do when you get out of a swimming pool? Dry off. Well, if you don't get in it, then you don't have to dry off. But I loved surfing magazines. I loved hot rod magazines. I was the only guy in my group at Ponca City High School that didn't know crap about cars. But I loved hot rod magazines. I don't know, it's something about the fact of putting things into magazines. I do not know what it is, and I read them. I was a Boy Scout, and my favorite part of Boy Scout was getting the Boy's Life magazine that came, because I didn't like going out and camping and stuff like that, but I loved the Boy's Life magazine. And I became second class. I was not able to become first class Boy Scout because I didn't know how to swim, and that's part of being first class. But I didn't care because I could still get the Boy's Life magazine and the variety of things in it, because they would have comic strips in there, and they would have fiction stories, and they would have letters from people, and then they would have facts that you should know. Just something about the written word, Black Beauty. Maybe it was Black Beauty that I wrote the author and got a letter back. Walter Farley. If it's Walter Farley, I think he's the one who wrote Black Beauty, and I got a letter back from him, and I was just impressed with books and the way they looked when they were stacked up. Man, and it's like that's the thing that would cause my endorphins to start having a party, is books and reading. And I don't know.
So did you write for the school paper or make your own books or ever have like a
I wrote
or something like that?
I didn't do things specifically like that because that would involve working with someone else, which was never my thing. But I do remember, and I had it until not too long ago, I wrote a fiction story one of the summers I was living with my grandparents, and I had it till not too long ago, and it was written out in ink on wide line paper, and I think the story took 3 pages, and here's what I remember of it. It was a mystery story, but I was so proud of myself because they narrowed down to who the bad person was because they had found a cigarette butt that had lipstick on it. I'm sure nobody in the history of humankind had ever thought about solving a crime that way. To me, I came up with that idea, and I was so thrilled. This is how they were able then to start moving towards her because they found it. And I was so pleased with myself. I wrote that. I wrote a poem to my mother when I was 14 that I still have, and that I do still have. And I was always pleased about it because I did not use it. It had rhyming, but I did not use traditional rhyming. I always wanted to do something a little bit different. I didn't want to be considered as lazy with that way, or, okay, I'm not going to go out and mow the yard. I'm lazy that way because my mother just had a push mower and she kept wanting me to go out there. And if I hated the thing, and then worst of all, she would give me the job to do it like I'm overworked. She'd give me the job to do it, and I wouldn't do it, and I'd look out the window, and of course she's out there with that push mower and pushing it. So I'm lazy in that way. But then I'm not lazy as far as a written project and wanting to do something distinctive, wanting to do something different, or even intentionally copying someone. When I was a kid, I wrote a couple of poems because I wanted them to sound like something Edgar Allan Poe would have written. So I'm not trying to trick people. I'm just wanting to take his style. And of course, when I do it, it's not anything I'd be interested in today. But I don't want to just do something. So I was involved. I was interested in reading long before I was interested in writing. Actually, any serious writing on my part begins when I come back from Vietnam. That's when the poetry writing starts. But I was obviously a person before then.
Yeah. We'll get into that in just a second. Just had a couple more.
I got into it.
Yeah, you did get into it. So did you want to study English or be a writer? Is that what you wanted to major in college, or be a teacher like Dr. Coyle?
Not a teacher at first. That comes when I have Dr. Coyle, and he's a teacher. Thank God he wasn't a brain surgeon. I'd still be there trying to study how to be a brain surgeon. So not a teacher. In fact, I've never told anybody this before. When I first told my mother I decided to become a teacher, farther down the road here, she said, that really surprises me. She says, I'm really surprised. She says, because you used to come home and brag about how you made 1 or 2 English teachers in high school cry. And that's not a great story for me to remember. I was a smart ass. And I was really interested in reading and literature, but not necessarily what the teachers were. And these are great ladies. God, I wish I could see them now. Great ladies. And so we would do things, or we would not pay attention, or we would flip something and stuff. And then we thought it was cool sometimes if we could get them agitated. And that's long before I was a teacher. So my mother said, I am really surprised. So no, I hadn't thought about being a teacher. It was always about books and reading, but it was not about going to a class and learning about it. First of all, in my mind, I was smarter than anybody that was teaching any literary course, and there's nothing that they could teach me. That would be a waste of time. The money is not really the issue at that time. It's the structure that I want to avoid. I want to read, and I'll still do it sometimes now in my advanced age. Over the last few years, I've had fun checking out certain syllabi from certain courses at big universities. What works of literature are they assigning their students? And if it looks really cool, then I'll read that as if I'm in that class. But I can read it on my schedule, and I don't have to take tests and stuff like that. So the reading part was always there. I always had a book with me always. People would say, I don't see how you can read so many books. How do you get so many books read? And one thing was, I just said, carry one with you, and you get little 5 and 10 minute periods of time, and those things add up. But I enjoyed reading. I enjoyed what may be a little different from some people. Some people enjoyed reading a book because of the ending and how they feel at the end of it, while I'm enjoying the actual telling of the story. Or they enjoy the story and I'm more involved in the nuts and bolts of how I'm trying to dig into it and say, whoa, that right there made me cry. What in the world happened here? How did that happen? But I want to go off and do this independent study. So I'm like 17 years old, and I'm not seriously wanting to do independent study. I'm wanting to read heavy-duty literature, but I'm wanting to read it on my own. I didn't hang out with groups. My group of buddies made a singing group together where they could do the Beach Boys songs, and they loved it, and they sounded great. And they almost cried because I couldn't be a part of that group, but it's because I could not harmonize. I couldn't. And they were stunned. It was so automatic to them. They couldn't understand why somebody else, and it doesn't matter which part you gave me, I couldn't hit the tune. I'd be off key. So I wasn't in groups. I was a loner, and I'm not sure I knew I was a loner, but I was satisfied with the way things were. And that's what books were doing. But I would read Solzhenitsyn's books when I was in high school, about what it was like in the communist Russia and all, and that kind of stuff. The big high school I read The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich by Shirer. Massive book. As a paperback, it's massive. The type is small. I wouldn't even be able to look at it now. And I read the book, and I didn't do it as a challenge. It was just interesting to me, and the size of the book was no impediment to me being able to do it. So I've just always loved reading before I got into actually writing and before I got into wanting to take classes about it, because you have to reach a certain point where you're smart enough to know that there's an advantage in taking classes under certain people. They will bring out stuff in you that you're not going to bring out yourself. I didn't want the structure. My first semester of college at Northern Oklahoma College. That's where.
So you're 18 when you started?
No, because I'm a young guy.
17.
Yeah. So if I was born in, I'm born in 48, and so this is 1966. So I graduate from high school at late 17. So you're basically right. But I'm going to enroll in college before I turn 18. But a couple months later, I turn 18. But a friend of mine, The Monkees comes out as a new TV show. And there's no DVRs or stuff like that. And Mike Wright, buddy of mine, we dug the Monkees. But we had an evening class at Northern Oklahoma. This is before my first semester before I go. And so sometimes we want to stay home and watch the Monkees and miss that class at Tonkawa. So missed it one time, went the next time, told the instructor we'd had a flat tire. And then we went to a couple of classes, then came and we wanted to stay home and watch this episode. So we stayed. Next time I went, told them we had a flat tire. Instructors at NOC are nice. They're not causing a problem. Watched a couple. The next time we know we can't miss anymore. We've got to go. Let me tell you, all my stories are true. I'm not going to tell you a story that's not true. We decide we can't miss anymore. We go to NOC, or we try to. On the way there, we actually have a flat tire and have to withdraw out of that class. So that's the first semester. And
Okay.
but that's because something took me out of my desire. Seeing the Monkees was more what I wanted to do then. I was a tad bit immature at the time. I was always the youngest one in my class and was probably a little immature, you might say.
So speaking of trying to get to class and not quite making it, I wanted to turn to your book, The Smell of Light. So the
Smell of the Light.
The light. Um, so you open it with "Let's drop out."
Let's drop out. Why not? Because
so talk me through that. What
so
happened?
so I decide. I thought I was through teaching and talking about Vietnam because I had my earlier book with the University of Oklahoma Press, and it was The Big Picture. And it came out in 1989. It's gone through 3 editions. It's still in print because it's not outdated. There's nothing in it that's wrong. It's people's opinions about the war, and those opinions still basically hold up. And it was pretty successful because I put a variety of. The question is, what should I be teaching my students about the war? What should we tell our children about the Vietnam War? And I don't have an answer I'm looking for. Something comes to me and I say, no, that's not it. And I toss it down. No, tell me. And so in the book, we put the responses, and it's a wide variety of ideas. And I don't have an axe to grind. I'm somebody that went to Vietnam, but people who chose not to didn't bother me. Somebody that would rather go to jail didn't bother me. Rather go to Canada wouldn't bother me. Trick the doctor wouldn't bother me. That didn't bother me. The people who were anti-war, my age or not, didn't bother me. I felt like everybody had their own decisions to make. Now, if you had asked my grandma at the time, she would have given you a little bit of a different story than that. So I decide I'm through teaching and talking about Vietnam. And then I find out just about 4 years ago that my book from 1989 that I had long forgotten about is being used with students at the University School of Milwaukee in Wisconsin, one of the oldest and leading private schools, college preparatory schools in the United States of America. And one of the instructors there has been using it for 10 years, and now 2 are using it. Yeah. And in history classes and in English classes, and they teach it. And I started visiting with them, and the fact that people were still using my material, my spin on things, as it were, led me to decide, well, maybe I'll do a little bit more. But now I wanted to make it a little bit more personal. So the first book was The Big Picture, and so the second was more personal. And I, fortunately, okay, here we go. Now writing, I was a letter writer in Vietnam. My family, I don't know how many I wrote, but my family still has 52 letters I wrote my mother when I was in Vietnam. 52 letters. And that was most. I don't think there's a big stash that got lost because she kept them. I don't have any of them that they wrote me because as a soldier, you're not going to pack those things around. Yeah. Still have 52. So that's how many. And so I was writing, and they were really descriptive letters. And they're still available. So I thought, well, okay, that's interesting. I've got that. I could take the war and make it more personal from my standpoint. And I've got these letters, and they're dated. So I laid all the letters out on the floor in front of me in order and thought, I can make something out of this. And then I got to thinking, yikes, what am I talking about? That's going to be a lot of work. What in the world am I talking about? I don't even know what I'm talking about now. And for some reason, the idea came to me to recreate the information in the letters in the form of poems, so it would be shorter snatches of material to give people at a time. They wouldn't lose their interest. You could do different types of poetry, because I was interested in found poetry and concrete poetry. And almost journalistic style poetry, and then some of the more emotional kind of stuff. And I thought, wow, anything I wanted to do in writing a novel, a nonfiction book, short stories, I can do with poems. And in some ways I can make them more emotional, and I can hit people in the spine with it. And I thought, wow. And so there we are. And I didn't write them out chronologically. I mean, there were certain things, and I couldn't automatically tell you right now, but certain of them fell into places more obviously subjects for poems, and I kind of worked on those. And some I was more interested in, and then some I didn't have all the letters. I had to work on getting more letters and work them in. But I appreciate what you're doing because I want to be remembered, for a while on. And that's why I like having my 2 books, and it's been said that nobody really dies until the last person who knew them in life dies, that kind of thing. But I like this, so I thought, okay, I want to tell my story, but I want to do it differently than anybody else has ever done. Mm-hmm. Nobody has a poetry book about Vietnam that's in chronological order, and I just once. I didn't go back and forth on that. Once I locked into that, I said, that's the selling point right there. Yeah. I have a story to tell. But is it going to be any good or not? And I'm not questioning my ability to turn what I have into interesting stories. I'm wondering whether I have enough of it there. So believe it or not, I'm going to answer your question in a minute. So when I have half of them, I send it to the poetry editor of the VVA veteran, David Wilson, and he reads them. He's got half of them, and he loves them. And he says, when you finish this, I'm going to give you a great review if you maintain the quality and you maintain your voice. The voice has to be you. If you can maintain what you have in this first half, if you can maintain your voice and the quality, I'm going to give you a great review on this. And so then that kind of fired me up. So I want to do it in order. And for me, Northern Oklahoma College is a big part of my personal story because I had so much fun there. Mm-hmm. It was a blast. The first time I went there before the war, the main song playing on the jukebox there on campus was the Monkees' Last Train to Clarksville. And when I went back to NOC after the war, the main song being played on the same jukebox was Maggie May by Rod Stewart, and the very last line you can hear is "Got to get on back to college one of these days." And it was just fun. At NOC, I made money. We played pinball games, and 5 or 6 of us would put a dollar bill on the top of the pinball machine, and then would each play a game, and high score takes the money. I made money. My buddies get embarrassed when they know that at OSU I made money by taking in ironing.
Oh, really?
I love to iron, and at OSU I would made money by taking in ironing 10 cents a piece, and I knew how to iron the shirts and everything like that. So I want to tell my story from the beginning. The beginning is Northern Oklahoma College because we drop out of Northern Oklahoma College to get into the Army. And
just turn the car around.
We're in the only little hiccup in the poem from 100% accuracy is the number of guys, because it says me and 4 others. It's 5 of us are going to join together, but 4 of us are actually going to school. When we drop out, we pick up a 5th guy. So there's 4 of us in the car on the way to NOC. It's our 2nd semester of school, spring semester, and life is carefree. And one of the guys just out of the blue says, I got an idea. Why don't we drop out of school and join the Army? And we turned the car around in the middle of the road, went back. My problem was I didn't even go back and officially drop out. So that became an issue later. But that's how serious we were. And then the 5 of us joined together. We were sworn in together in Oklahoma City. And one of the guys, his brother, swore us in. So one of our 5 is Charlie Smith. His brother swore us in, and I have our Army serial numbers. They are right in order.
Oh, wow.
From 43 to 47, our Army serial numbers. Now, we did not serve together. We didn't go to basic training together. It's not one of those stories. We go off to Vietnam together and come back like the deer hunters. No. But we did join the Army together. And our numbers are serial numbers, and we did drop out, and we did not regret it at the time. And what I ended up doing, and this is how brilliant the Army is with so many things in the government, I joined on what's called the 90-day delay plan. 90-day delay plan, which means I had to take an oath, and I was in the Army but I was free to do anything I wanted to. I had a certain date to show up, and it was 90 days in the future. So I'm on the 90-day delay plan, which doesn't mean I serve for 90 days. I don't have to show up for 90 days. Now I'm 18 years old. I'm not in college anymore, but I know a lot of college girls. Mm-hmm. I'm not in the Army. I'm not under the threat of the draft coming. And you would think a guy would have fun. I ended up not having as much fun as people might think because I was a stick in the mud. I did not start drinking until I was in the Army. And
so
I was
basic training. Were you still in the States, or did you?
It was after Vietnam, so I was in the States. So I was the drinking. Probably at basic training. Unfortunately for me, I'm one of those people who my first drink of beer, I liked it, and that's not good because I'm a recovering alcoholic. I haven't had a drink in 25 years, but man, I used to really do it. And I could drink lots of beer, which is what an alcoholic's body can do. The regular person can't drink lots of beer and function. I'm not bragging. I'm just saying we can do that. I was a cigar smoker for years. Never smoked cigarettes. Cigar smoker for years. That started when I was in the Army. So I never did any cigar smoking or any beer drinking until I got into the Army. And then I made up for lost time.
So what year did you get a hold of all of these letters again? When did you start working on this?
Yeah, that was, I think it says in my bio stuff for the book that most of these poems were written in 2015 and 2016, I believe. So 2015 and 2016, because they're not things that I had to go through family issues, getting a hold of them, kind of had a delay of things. And but most of the poems were written in 2015 and 2016. And one thing, and I'm not sure I set out to do it this way, but most of my poems are short. I want it that way. I don't want to have to worry about somebody's attention span. I believe in getting in and getting out. Lead up to something, that's fine. I have lots of gotcha final lines which are seen by some people as being gimmicky. That's not accepted throughout the whole poetic world and all, especially if you overplay it. But most of my poems have a line or a phrase that's going to be memorable. That's the whole idea, and that's something that you can do with poetry that you can't do otherwise. And I don't mean sing-songy, but I wanted my stuff to be. And I consider myself, this is me labeling myself, a everyman of the Vietnam War, because I represent what most of the men went through, probably. That's not a brag statement. I was there at the height of the war. There were more Americans there. I was there 68 and 69. More Americans were there at one time than any other time, so I'm representative there. But also, I wasn't drafted. I volunteered, as most of the men did. But also, I was not in direct combat. I was in what they call combat support, and numbers vary, but likely 75% of the American men that served in Vietnam served in combat support roles. That does not take anything away from their duty, their courage, their bravery, because they're there, and if somebody sends them somewhere, they have to go. It's not their choice that they're in a space that's pretty safe, or a job that's not all that dangerous. So like the movie Platoon, I saw the movie Platoon with my mother, and when we walked out of that movie, we enjoyed going to movies together based on our previous relationship. Midnight Cowboy, we went together and just loved it. There's another one I'm trying to think of. But anyhow, we went to platoon, came out of it, talked about it. My mother could no more relate to what she saw, I could no more relate to what I saw on the screen than she could. Platoon was not my army. I wasn't in the jungle. My buddies weren't fighting against each other. Although I do have a poem in the book about a guy that wanted to fight me one time over a personality conflict thing.
Let's fight.
Yeah, let's fight. Good job. And I didn't fight him for 3 reasons. Well, let's see. So I didn't fight. That's a poem that bothers me because I kind of backed down to the guy. I mean, the guy's saying, let's fight. I say, no, because I don't want to fight. And he's pushing me. And then he even tries to get it to make sense. He says, well, I've been like this before with other guys, and we'd just have a fist fight, and everything would be okay after that. And I think, well, great, but no, I'm not going to. And he pushed me. I didn't turn around and run away or something, but we didn't fight. So then I kind of color it up this way. I never fought him for 3 reasons. I couldn't see anything behind his eyes. It wouldn't have proved anything, and I sure wasn't going to give him the satisfaction. So he's kind of a scary guy. There's no sense behind it. And if we fight just because he says to, that gives him too much power over me. And but that's me thinking about it later. I'm not sure all that was in my mind at the time. But that's not the platoon type fighting where groups are fighting against each other. So we didn't have that. We didn't have that where I was on a helicopter base. But we also did not have the day-to-day stress that those guys had. So
tell me about where you were stationed.
Yeah, when I have to be careful. When I talk to veteran groups and I tell them where I was stationed, I immediately have to duck to get out of the way of the tomatoes that are thrown. I was at an in-country R&R center. For the big R&R period, people would get about midway in their tour. And you might go to Bangkok, or you might go to Sydney, Australia, which I did. Or if you're married, you could go to Hawaii. Or you could go to Hawaii, and we let the married guys go there because that's the only place where a wife could meet you. So that's the big R&R places. But there were R&R places in country that you could go and kind of relax a little bit and take the edge off. And my base was right there at one. I served at an in-country R&R base. It's southeast of Saigon. It's called Vung Tau, V-U-N-G, and then a separate word, T-A-U, Vung Tau. It was an Army air base, and I was in the helicopter company, and then the town was Vung Tau right there. And it was an in-country R&R center. In fact, pretty legitimate rumors were that the Viet Cong also used it as an R&R center. In other words, it was kind of a King's X kind of area. But and so the reason I have to duck from the thrown tomatoes is because I was so lucky. Most guys didn't have that experience. I'd be there talking to a guy that I communicated with up north, and he'd say, we're getting excited here, 2 more months, and we're going to be able to come down to Vung Tau for 3 days. We're really looking forward to it. Vung Tau was where I was all the time. And we'd go into the town, and totaling up the amount of time that it was off limits to us was probably about 2 weeks out of the year I was there. We just went into Vung Tau with the bars and the eating the soup on the corners that we'd been told not to eat the native stuff and things like that. So I was in a safe place. I was in a helicopter company, Chinooks, the big helicopters with the twin rotor blades, and we could carry people inside and we could carry things underneath in slings. So we were a combat support helicopter company. In fact, we were the 147th Assault Support Helicopter Company. That was our title. 147th ASHCO, 147th Assault Support Helicopter Company, which tells you right there, we supported the units that were fighting. We frequently would carry the guys in and drop them off, and they would do the fighting, and we would come back. And my job was not even to go with the helicopters. My job was to stay back and communicate with them. I kept track. Every helicopter we had, and we might have 13 of them out at one time each day on a mission, they had to constantly communicate with me to let me know they were okay and where they were and what they were doing. So for each helicopter, I would have a mission sheet in front of me, and helicopter 013 might call in and say, this is 013. And they would say, we just left the pickup point for line 2, and we're on the way to the drop-off point for line 2. And when they say that over the air, nobody knows what it means, because they don't know anything about lines and stuff like that. What they're telling me is look at their mission sheet, and I've got the coordinates for where the pickup was. And so then I know they just left those coordinates. That's where they're headed. If we lose contact with them, I know they're somewhere in between and can send assistance. So my job was back then. So I'm relatively, now you're still in Vietnam.
Right.
We still had 2 rocket attacks. The rocket attacks are really serious. We had 2 of those, and we'd have mortars occasionally, but it's not something that we were frequently in danger of. In fact, in one of my poems, I was surprised when I got there that they assigned me a M14. First of all, that.
Is that in the arms room?
Yeah, arms room. Good job, arms room. The first thing I get to do when I get to my company in Vietnam, they give me this M14, and that tells me 2 things. But they're going to keep it in the arms room, so that tells me 2 things. The weapon of choice at the time was the M16. And they're giving me the earlier M14. That tells me it must not be too dangerous or too combat critical. I get an M14 instead of an M16. And then more telling than that, I don't even take it with me. They keep it in the arms room. And in case there's an alert, then I go and check out my own M14. So it can't be too dangerous a place. But I tell all of those stories in there. And so then the other thing about the arms room is I get to talking to the guy that's running it, and he's from Blackwell, Oklahoma. And I'm from Ponca City. I've just gone 9,000 miles, and one of the first guys I meet lives 14 miles from where I do.
That must have been a strange
deal.
feeling.
And yet, we didn't buddy up because of that. I don't remember. We just talked, nothing bad. We just, that didn't really mean that much other than being, hey, that's interesting.
So what was your day-to-day routine?
My job was called a flight operations coordinator. So I would get up early in the morning. I'd be awakened like at 5, and they're going to take off at 7 probably. But I have to get to the office and receive the information. Here's what we need a helicopter to go here and and do this. And then take it here, or pick up these men and take them here, or whatever. And so then I've got to make out the mission sheets. I've got to take what they want, what the missions need to accomplish, and then I assign them to the helicopters and make out those mission sheets. And then my main job is to stay in communication until they all come back safely home. Because if they're lost, or if they need help, they might. There could be any number of reasons why they would contact me, and then after that, it was a regular job, pretty well regular hours. We lived in hooches. We had our beds and things we had to keep super clean, but we had hooch maids that did that. There were women who we paid $2 a month or something like that, and it was all legitimate. They made the beds. We had 2 pair of boots, and so they always shined the extra pair there every day and did all the sweeping, and it was fine. And then we would go and hang out and drink beer, go to the enlisted club and drink beer. I worked with officers a lot, even though I never was an officer, but because of my job I worked with officers a lot. Also, another part of my job was the officers stayed at a hotel in the town. And so my job was to, as they came in and as we needed them, drive the pilots into their quarters that they were staying in town and come back. So I did a lot of things with officers. So because of that, I would occasionally get invited to the officers club, which is a step up, and it's cool. But I was not the immature guy before. I was more. This is not a really good thing to say, but I was good at doing what the Army told me to do. So I was not a troublemaker. I became a troublemaker later, but I wasn't a troublemaker. So I can go into the officers club and nobody think anything about it. But the most memorable time, and I write about it, is I was invited in there one time when they showed the movie Those Magnificent Men in Their Flying Machines, the comedy about an air race from London to Paris or whatever, and different kinds of aircraft and stuff. And it was a long movie, and it was hilarious. But to be in there watching that movie, which is great, and to be in Vietnam watching it, and more than that, to be in with these stud pilot men, because these guys were stud. I've never in my life seen anything like when we know there's some imminent danger or somebody needs help right away, and these guys were on it. I mean, that I've never seen any group of men anywhere like the pilots, and this could be exaggerated over time like those pilots. But another movie that's memorable that I write a poem about, and 2 English teachers have chosen that as their favorite one in the whole book, of course, is Mockingbird, because I was promoted to a higher rank when I was in Vietnam. And to make it official, you have to go where the headquarters is, which was a different city than we were in. So I'm going to have to fly to that city to go through the official ceremony to get the next higher rank. And because of how far away it is, I'm going to have to spend the night there. None of that's horrible. It's a cool thing. But I happened to be there on their movie night. And they have an outdoor setup, and they have a shed, and on the side of the shed, they just drop down 1 or 2 white sheets and have a projector going, and they show a movie. And the movie was To Kill a Mockingbird, which has become a classic movie. But the idea of me watching To Kill a Mockingbird under the Vietnam skies is kind of a unique kind of thing. There are certain things that can only happen in one place.
Yeah. So as I read through your book, I wondered about a couple of things, specifically how you dealt with loneliness, or maybe did you feel depressed?
I felt with it, or what I wrote about how I felt.
Maybe both.
My immediate reaction to your question was, well, let's not just make this about me. And then I got to thinking, wait a minute, this is about me. Yeah, it was. I got in big trouble. The biggest trouble, if I'd been a troublemaker, I'd have gotten in more trouble. I got in big trouble in Vietnam about 3/4 of the way through, or 2/3 of the way through, because my mother wrote a letter to my commanding officer saying she hadn't heard from me in a long time, and I was a regular letter writer, and she was concerned, and can you tell me that he's okay and what's up? And he hated getting that letter. Not because he's a bad guy. He doesn't want a situation to develop where a mama might contact him for something like that. He hated getting that letter. And he wants to make sure he doesn't get another one. But he did that's the commanding officer, because the letter went straight to him. Well, then he did what they all do, called in the first sergeant, because the first sergeant's the one who does the dirty work. First sergeant called me in, and I'd worked with them a lot. And if they had to give me a grade on the quality of my work and dependability and all stuff like that, it'd be like an A++++++. I mean, I didn't want to stay in the Army, but I fit in. But he rips into me and tells me the deal and says that can't happen again. And the first sergeant tells me, we're about the distance we are here. He says, from now on until you leave Vietnam, every Monday morning, I want you to have a letter addressed to your mother on my desk. Every Monday morning. I don't care what you tell her. I don't care what you say. It's to have a letter in it right here. And he was serious, and it would have played good in a movie for people to see him barking and stuff like that. But he really wasn't. They wanted to fix this deal. But it wasn't like they had to get on to me for this and for this and this, and now we've got this. It wasn't that kind of a deal. But they had this. And so to tell you about that, I think I put a letter there like the next 2 Mondays, and then never did, and nothing was said, but I was writing my mother. Mm-hmm. So in other words, it wasn't a deal where he was marking off when it came in. So I think I put it there for like 2 Mondays and then didn't, and they didn't say anything, but I sure wrote my mother. But I also told her that I had gone through what I considered to be like a Van Gogh blue period, and I couldn't explain it. But man, it was different than anything before or anything afterwards. And, well, I just felt so lonely. I said it almost felt like I was on the other side of the moon. And the thing about being on the other side of the moon is that you're far away and you're by yourself. And I don't know what, I can't say what happened to me. Part of it, I think, was just a natural passage of time. I had been gone from home for so long. There was nothing going on about my girlfriend. Everybody was great to write. My girlfriend stayed with me all the way through the Army time and stuff. Never any threats from anybody. I got letters daily from my mother, but from my 2 grandmothers also, and they would send packages and stuff. So I don't know what, but it was something that could not be salved by reading. I could not take so there's a depression, quality to it. I'm so lonely, I'm going to get a book. And I don't know. And it kind of bothers me that I don't know. So, as I said earlier, I'm a loner, but I want to be a loner on my terms. And being a loner on my terms may involve engagement with other people at certain times. And so for whatever, and I wasn't mad at my mother. And I didn't, so I'm not punishing anybody. I'm not saying, they're not going to get another letter from me. They're not going to, it wasn't it. It just, everything stopped. And another thing that's a little bit interesting, here's something I hadn't thought about that you just brought out in me. I cannot go back and see what was happening to me during that time because there's no damn letters. See what I'm saying?
Oh, you're erased.
I'm erased. I do not know what was going on during that time or what my feelings were. I don't know, because if I want to know about different periods of my year in Vietnam, I go to the letters. This is about me not writing letters. Therefore, there is no record, I say, or I've been erased, you say. And that means, I'm old enough now that I don't want to go through some kind of analytic psychotherapy or something, because I don't care that much. And I don't think you necessarily could. But I think I've never thought about that until I sat across here from you, that I cannot go and see. Well, let me read here and see why I didn't write letters, because I was not keeping a journal on the side.
Yeah.
That was my letter, and it included everything. Boy, the new Rod McEwen book coming out, I told her what my favorite poems were in it, and she responded back and told me what her favorite poems were in it. Communicate. Everything was being done in the letters. It wasn't anything. Here's my list here's the favorite TV shows that we're allowed to see now, or my favorite books, or send me these books. Everything, or here's what I think, or how's Grandma Winnie doing? Everything was in the letters, but the letters are one-sided now because I didn't keep what they sent me. Of course, it would be a different deal. It'd be in a little bit their reaction.
Yeah.
But I realize now, too, that I'm glad I did it, but I should never have given so much detail in these letters to my mother to let her know how dangerous occasionally I was in. Because I did go flying. I flew enough to get 1 air medal, which represented 25 flying missions. That was all on volunteer time, because that's not part of my job. And yet it was so boring around there a lot of times that I would go flying on missions when I didn't have to. And the pilots and the crew, I always got along with everybody. Everything, they always took me along. So I'm telling her the dangers. I was in one of the helicopters went into night combat assault, and we took fire. And there's a couple of other things. I'm talking about how much time I spent at the window as the gunner of a helicopter, because the gunner was fine with napping and letting me do it, because if we ran into anything, then he would take over. But I was there so long that I got windburn. My face was just massively red. And I'm writing and I'm telling her all this stuff and about the rock. And I know now I know you don't write home and tell your mother something like that because of the reaction that'll happen, what it'll mean to her. But now it allowed me to come up with the book because everything's in the letters.
Yeah. And there's so many poems that stand out. And before I finally remember to push record here, we were talking about two poems in particular, Sarah Lawrence and Eating Glass. I was wondering if you could tell me a little bit about those, and let's have you read those. Those are powerful.
And those two are possibly my two favorite poems, but separately, they're the two that have gotten the most mentions by people who have written about this collection. So, and those are separate things. Eating Glass, I think, is maybe my first real serious attempt to actually write a real poem, something that somebody might consider a poem. And I'm not sure if I did it or not, but it's a poem that has achieved great attention. In fact, 5 different literary journals have asked for permission to reprint Eating Glass, and a couple of them already have. The others are in the works. So it's something, and each one of those, they didn't know that other people were interested. These are people that are just with no other knowledge coming to that poem and saying, wow. So I don't know, whatever. Anyhow, so this is Eating Glass. The first time I saw a preschool kid, do they have schools here, smoking a cigarette, I just stood and stared. Mama San, squatting to pee along the road, never drew a second glance. But a child casually smoking was hard for me to unsee. For a month, I had a reoccurring dream of a smoking toddler, a circus performer eating glass, and a ward filled with thalidomide babies. But after about 4 weeks, the dream became a memory of a dream of a memory. And if nothing else, I've blown that one little event way out of proportion. But I'm telling you, I've got the letter. My mother could. I put the age. The kids were like 4 or 5. I think this is not. This is not politically correct nowadays to say this. But in my letter home, I wrote to my mother. It bothered me so much to see it. I felt like I should just slap one of those kids in the face that's smoking cigarettes. I mean, that's just my reaction. But then I said, but I would get in trouble for that. Well, surely I wouldn't consider it, but it was just so amazing. That's one of the things that was so different from American society. I mean, these are obviously preschool kids, little kids, and they're picking up butts, and they're seriously smoking. They're not pretending to. They're smoking, and at the time back home, there were kids having candy cigarettes and pretending to be smoking. But that's not this. But I don't know, just the way it came out, and the thalidomide babies is a nod to my mother. That's some medical attention that went wrong in the late 50s, early 60s, and ended up, it was given to babies, and it led to deformities. And there was a major pictorial section in Life one time, and I remember my mother and I going over it and talking about it and how much it bothered her. So that's like a nod to my mother. Now, this is not going to mean anything. Nobody's going to care. But there are all kinds. There's probably 85 references when I'm gone that people can dig through here if they were family or had any idea. Or some of them are. I do have journals now. I'm on my 3rd consecutive poetic journal that I started when this started to come together as a project. And I have everything in there that I've submitted when it's been accepted. when I've written them, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And some of the secrets are in there. There's a lot of nods to my mother in here. I just wanted to do that. It might be something Rimbaud would have done or somebody, who knows? But I wanted to do that. So thalidomide baby sends people to Google, to see what's going on there. Mama San's peeing along the road. People get that image in their heads. And then I've got the thing for a month. I had a reoccurring dream, and then but after about a month, et cetera, et cetera. But then I thought, looking back, this is what you can do with poetry. Looking back, I don't want to have month and month there. Mm-hmm. I don't want to have month and month there. But I want it. So I changed month to 4 weeks, and it worked. That kind of thing. Anyhow, there are some people who, not every poet in the world thinks that this is a great poetry book. Not everybody's a fan of mine. There are people that really are. Among a lot of people, that's considered to be a pretty serious poem. It gives you things to think about. Sarah Lawrence is interesting because it is, I will break this news with you, one of the few poems in here that is not actually based on a specific letter that I wrote home. And there's nothing in here that says every one of these comes from a letter, but certainly 80% or more of these are actual incidents that happened and are still in the letters that I wrote about it. But to flesh out my Vietnam experience, I add other things. And this one, Sarah Lawrence came to me at one point. I'm not even exactly sure. Maybe I have notes on why I wrote it. But I wanted to deal with the trauma of war while there, prior to the PTSD. So you didn't hear me read this morning?
I heard you read it in October.
Okay. Totally different this time.
Oh, really?
Very, very interesting. First of all, I explained for the younger people what Sarah Lawrence was, an all-female university for a long time, very prestigious. Now it's co-ed. And then read that. And the first time I read I Want to Go to Sarah Lawrence, laughter. For whatever reason. Laughter. And so then, I hesitate. I don't give dirty looks because I don't care. I want people to react to my stuff. I don't care how they react. So then I read a little bit more and I got to the second one. I wanted to go to Sarah Lawrence. And laughter, not chuckles, laughter on both sides, So I'm still going. And then I'm reading more. And then when I get to the last one and I read the last two, I've brought them in. I've made my point. There is not laughter, which is good. That's what I want. But I also see a couple of uncomfortable expressions, which I don't want. And I immediately say, immediately, the laughter, and I know people are peeing in their pants because they don't know what this guy's going to say. I said, the laughter that this received in the middle is totally appropriate. I have no problem with that because the way this was set up, you don't know what's coming. You don't know how you're supposed to react. And what I want is a reaction from you, not so much a specific one. So the people who laughed out loud in the middle of this, I'm fine with them. You can hang out with me all weekend if you want to. And that kind of diffused the thing because I wasn't giving people dirty looks, but they were feeling bad. Okay, so
once you get to the
so and I hadn't had that, and I've been fearful that people would do that, but then also again, it's interesting. But I want to do that with my poetry too. That's okay. Mm-hmm. So I'll read this one. Is that it, or have we run completely out of time?
No, I got plenty of memory. Plenty of.
Sarah Lawrence. Getting ready to lift off from Dong Tam, he made sure the Army nurse was buckled in, hooked up. He said, "You doing okay?" She said, "I wanted to go to Sarah Lawrence." He said, "Hang on, just hang on." She said, "I wanted to go to Sarah Lawrence." So you can see how there could be laughter there. And then I do this. He said, I heard you did all that you could, that no one could have done more. She said, I wanted to go to Sarah Lawrence. I should have gone to Sarah Lawrence. And when I get to that last part, before I do the last Sarah Lawrence's, then the people know. One of my favorite things to tell people about this, let's notes here. Here, a TU student says that poem strikes them as a moment frozen in time. Another TU student said that's a great example of show, don't tell, because you're getting the reaction from the person without knowing what caused it. But here's, and I made a note to myself about this, here's what made this poem work. Wanting it to be in my collection of poetry about my experience, it originally said, getting ready to lift off from Dongtam, I made sure the Army nurse was buckled in, hooked up. I said, you doing okay? When I took myself out of that, it changed everything. First of all, it made it more universal. That could have been anybody there. That opens it up to wider interpretation because they're not just looking at me. But for most of its life, this poem had I instead of he. And I have been very, very pleased ever since then that I changed it and took myself out of that, which also works a little bit with the idea that is not one that I actually wrote home, And I would have had no problem. It's poetic. I would have had no problem keeping the I in as from that standpoint.
Yeah.
I just like the way that it works. It works better this way. I also, for people to get the book sometime and look through it, I had a delightful, probably 3 hours one evening where I went through my manuscript and virtually murdered all of my punctuation. Not all of it, but man, I got that punctuation out of there. Because punctuation gets to where punctuation does too much of the work for the reader in poetry. Now, I'm not talking about other stuff. I want you to have to think a little bit about where to put the brakes on or when we're going around the corner and not rely on a slow stop or a full stop or something like that. My line breaks in my Vietnam poetry are intentionally chaotic. You don't know where they're going to occur. I don't want somebody to think they can sleepwalk through my book, because that would be dangerous, because you couldn't sleepwalk through Vietnam. You've got to be careful where you're placing your next step. People have to do that when reading here. It's way chaotic. I've got a poem called, this is another one that I feel bad about, and I've never read this or talked about this anywhere, but it's the story I never enjoyed telling. And it's because I ripped off a local Vietnamese person, because I was such a good guy when I went to Vietnam. I stayed on base the first 6 months, even with the town there, because I just stayed on base. And then finally guys talked me into going into the towns where the bars were and the whatever other stuff. And so I went, and after establishing a relationship with one of the bar owners, he would let me drink on credit, but I gave him my Timex. He really liked it. And then when I paid him, he gave me Timex back. Well, he doesn't know how short I am in Vietnam. He knows how long I've been coming to him regularly. But remember, I was in Vietnam 6 months before I started coming. So I'm leaving sooner than he thinks. And after a couple of months, he keeps letting me do that, but he doesn't require me to leave the watch with him, because he just fully trusts me. And at the end, I just skip out and own him. I bet by then I had built up probably $130. It's not a massive thing, but still, you don't do it. So what I did, so I tell the story, but I try to make it even more chaotic. I would never want somebody to read this and think, oh, that's how he writes. I call it experimental here. It was worse than this. Originally, I had hash marks randomly divided through to make it even more difficult. The deal being, this is a story that needs to come out, but I'm not sure it's a story I want people to hear. So if I tell it in a really confusing way, look at that stuff. Look what's going through my mind while I'm doing this. Because I feel so bad about what I did to this guy. I didn't at the time. And so I write this in a really messed up way and talk myself into taking those hashes or whatever they are out of there, or it would have been virtually unreadable. It makes... So I wrote here in my notes, it's experimental. It's intentionally hard to read. I once had random forward slashes placed throughout the poem to intentionally make it virtually unreadable. And it's one of David Wilson's favorite poems. He's the poetry reviewer of a VBA veteran. And so what I've done, which is really cool for me, these are the notes that I've made based on reactions people have given me to the poems. Anytime, here's a poem where I mentioned the black rot, kind of a sexual kind of disease. And one of my college students, after reading it, came to me later. She said she had to look up what black rot was. So I put her initials down there and I put that. She had to look up what black rot was. And then here's one where a soldier shoots himself in the foot to avoid going to Vietnam. And David Wilson says, I never understood why people would do that. So any reaction that I get, Matt is my son. His name in parentheses means this is one of the poems that he especially likes. USM is University School of Milwaukee in Wisconsin, and the educators there have put together a student packet of 26 of these poems for middle grade students, because obviously there's a lot of them in here that they can't use. That's one thing. It's got sex and violence in it. So up here I've noted as I get to them which ones they like. Here Matt says he loves the ending of this movie. Here I have two different versions of this poem. Here it explains the difference between that and the other one. Oh, this one. This says, I lost this one and was totally... I lost this one and totally forgot about it. When I ran across it again, it was like seeing an old friend. That's the one that amazes people. Okay, this is the day before I'm going to Vietnam. I'm in San Francisco. I've said all my goodbyes. I'm in San Francisco. I'm going to Vietnam the next day. I'm not with my buddies. We're not going in groups, but I'm with a bunch of guys that are going. I'm going to Vietnam the next day. This poem says, the title is Cleaned Out.
Yeah.
I was in San Francisco waiting to fly to Vietnam the next day, and it was payday. Got my pay, went off to shower, pants thrown over a chair. Mid-shower, it hits me. I race back to my room, and everything's still there, except the cash. I realize I'm among a group of guys that I don't even know, and we're all going to Vietnam tomorrow or soon, but still. You would think a guy's stuff wouldn't be messed with. Hope when I get to Vietnam, I don't need any cash. And see, I just feel like, and lots of people are this way, I feel like there's lots of people that could tell these stories, but everybody has their own style about doing it. In other words, I've got a couple of nieces that, and they've proven this, but you could give them 20 written poems and say Bill McCloud wrote 5 of these, and they could almost 100% pick out the 5 just because they know my style. So I've gone through here and I've written notes. Anytime somebody has made a comment about one, I write it down. This says I went to the Officers Club several times, but this time was especially memorable. The University School of Milwaukee students study the poems, and then when I visit with them by Skype, and I'm supposed to be going there this June, we'll see, this June or next June, but I've talked to them 3 times by Skype, then they pick out what ones they want to go back and forth on. So I've noted here in my book all the ones that are in their packet, but then I also note the ones that they want to. This one about my buddy Vaughn and I sitting on the cot. He's playing the guitar and we're singing Beatles songs. I write here down to myself, it's not a serious or significant poem. There's probably zero chance of that poem ever being printed in some journal. By itself, it doesn't stand alone. But it's a good snapshot of my day-to-day life and does fit in with the flow of the other stuff. And there was even one poem I almost didn't put in, is this one from When I Came Back, and it simply addresses the fact that I could sleep all I wanted to that first month home because nobody wanted to nudge me because they had heard about startling a vet, and so I got plenty of sleep. I wrote that and thought it'd fit in, and I almost didn't put it in because it's not that major, it's not that significant. I almost didn't put it in. I decided to, and then a magazine called Vitamin Z, the 3 Z's as in sleeping, snoring, online, is put out by a group called Sleep Central, and they study sleep and dreams and sleep disorders, and they put out a cry for poems about sleeping and dreams. And I thought, what the heck, and I sent that to them, and they only chose 12 poems for their first journal, and they chose that one that I almost seriously put in the trash can and stuff.
Yeah, I thought that one stood out to me too. I'm someone who has sleep issues, and I thought, wow, what almost a subtle way to bring in this issue, something so routine and mundane sounding, sleep, but you're coming home from war and you're readjusting to life and your family is getting used to interacting with you again and you're changed. So I thought,
yep, and the role of sleep. So sleep is different to you there. It's a third of your.
It meant something else there than when you were back. And
I'm sure my mother would come in. I have no doubt that my mother would come in and peek in on me from time to time.
Yeah.
But nobody. And this is a slight exaggeration, but not total. You know, people didn't want to. You know, they let me. For one thing. They didn't want to bug me or bother me. My family was very appreciative of my service. And so, I mean, so I'm home for a month before I go to my next duty. And I was the king of the world. They were just so appreciative. So if I wanted to sleep, that would be fine, which was a little different from my teenage days if I'd want to sleep. And that push mower. I bet there's people that don't even know what a push mower is. Oh, So my Vietnam spirit, I've almost become, and this I didn't want to, a professional veteran. And that is one who's known for his service and can do things and generate some income based on the fact that he's a veteran outside of any military pay. We're not talking about somebody that retired. I didn't retire from the Army. I volunteered, served 3 years, and I was out. But I've had an experience, and I have some ability to write about it and talk about it, and I don't mind getting in front of people. And it's so crazy. People are so sweet. Every time I read, they want to come up and say, thank you for your service and thank you for coming home. I'm not this guy. And I'm not going to say anything to them because I'm appreciative of that. This was 100 years ago. This was in another universe. This was another I hardly remember. Now, the one thing I haven't mentioned, I'm going to sing the praises of Facebook, and I have never been a person who threatened to get off Facebook for any reason because I had 3 best friends in Vietnam. 2 of them I'm on Facebook with, and we haven't seen each other since 1969, and we may get together sometime.
Oh.
But Vaughn and Tim and I are together on Facebook, and they're not nearly as Facebook happy as I am. I have to draw them out and drag them out. But I also can connect with them. The other guy is just no contact. He's probably around somewhere. And so one of the guys is Vaughn, and his daughter a firefighter in Cambridge, Massachusetts, contacts me a lot, considers me family now. Got a great picture of her son the other day, which is my buddy Vaughn's grandson, holding up a poster supporting teachers in their walkout and stuff like that. And that wouldn't be, don't talk to me about writing letters anymore. That wouldn't happen. That's Facebook. I've got that connection and those photos, and that's Facebook. So all that other stuff that bugs people and they want to threaten to get off Facebook. Although most of the people who threaten to get off Facebook, until most recent times, were generally people who want to get a response. No, please don't go. We love what you say. Nowadays, there may be more reason to get off of it. Yeah. I'm still not going to. But I use Facebook to promote my stuff, too.
Yeah, it's a good way to connect with your readers. And
I'm not hesitant about it. Some people don't like my style because I talk about myself quite a bit and promote myself quite a bit, but I'm doing 2 sessions for William Bernhardt over Labor Day in Oklahoma City at the Red Sneaker Writers Conference. I'm doing 2. And one of them is my story about putting my letters together in poetry, which I'm doing for the Air Force Academy. And then my other session is on the poetry of self-promotion. And so then after turning in my paragraph to him entitled, and he accepted it, then I emailed him back and said, do you think that sounds a little put offish, the self-promotion of poetry? He says, that's exactly the kind of thing for the people we want. This is a conference that's for emerging writers who are trying to get all kinds of ideas and suggestions. And to me, one of the things is to throw yourself. People have to know. You have to make people aware of what you're doing sometimes, if that's important to you. It may not be. It doesn't have to be. People who write just for themselves, that's okay. I don't care. I know poets who are pretty good and have no intention of ever being published, because that's not their thing. But to me, my thinking is, what I write is not a poem until somebody else has read it or heard me read it. Now, that's not for everybody, but for me, if I write a bunch of poems and put them under the bed and nobody sees them, that's just paper under the bed. As far as I'm concerned, it's a two-way street.
Yeah.
People have to
have readers.
You have to have readers. That's important. Because that's what I want. I want to know, does this mean anything to you? Can you kind of see what I'm trying to say? Is it just gobbledygook? You know, what did it make you think of? You know, I have a poem. I have a poem that's not been published yet. It's a little controversial. It's called Poetry in a Bruised Face. Poetry in a Bruised Face. And the point of the poem is, this poem is about a friend I know who, and I can't remember, they had some kind of oral surgery or glaucoma, you know, something like that. Poetry in a bruised face. But then at the end of the poem, I said, but what did you think when you first read the title? What you thought is your poem. And see, that's basically what I did. That's kind of experimental, interactive, where you have almost 2 different people writing and stuff like that. You know, the thinking being somebody thinks somebody was abused or something like that, or maybe they were. And you have to be careful with triggers and stuff like that. You know, you can't. So I've never read that one, and I may submit it to selective places. Poetry in a Bruised Face. The idea at the end being, you know, what was your immediate thought when you read the title? For you,
I went straight to
the bad stuff.
Yeah, to the bad.
And then I say, for you, that was your poem. Not meaning that happened, not me, but meaning That's what you wrote.
Well, it's
after
the
title.
reader's, imagination and interpretation, and we project a piece of ourselves into.
Oh yeah, right.
Into what we read.
And I don't do it for any negative reason. I do it to
Yeah.
make a point that it is collaborative.
But I like the transition to it was from maybe a surgery. Or,
that's my point.
Yeah.
That's what I'm talking about. That's what the poem is.
So how do you want your work to be remembered? Because you published
Oh shit.
a lot more besides this.
Yeah. What's the line in Hamilton? Why are you writing like you're running out of life? Is that the line? I think that's it. Why are you writing like you're running out of life? I've got to a point now, it's something kind of mystical or magical happened to me at one point when I was putting these poems together. They started coming, they came fast.
Mm-hmm.
At one point, they were coming to me. I mean, I've heard other people describe this, and I said they were full of crap. They were coming alive inside of me, and I got to one point where I set everything down, went out and got in the car, and just started driving down the highway so that I would have to pay attention to stuff while I'm driving and stop thinking about stuff. And they were coming. I was writing 5 or 6 poems a day, and people will say they're, but not very good, but they're ones I went back over. So they were coming to me like, so I had that. Like I said, January and February of this year, 2018, in that 2-month period, I had 17 poems published in 6 different literary journals. I'm in a period right now where I'm writing a bunch of stuff, and I'm throwing out a bunch of stuff, and I'm finding the right people. I wrote something specifically for San Pedro River Review to a call that they had for poems that I knew would fit perfectly. They declined it. That's okay. People are different. No problem. Right hand pointing picked it up. They loved it. They thought it was great. That doesn't mean one's right and one's wrong. That means, so keep sending stuff out there. So I'm writing. I really like the idea of this project I'm doing now where the Hattiesburg, Mississippi Post newspaper has contracted me to give them at least 2 new poems every month written just for them that they can publish every month. And so far we've done 6. That gives me a continuing, I wonder if that's going to be responsible for any longevity. That I wonder if me diving into that will mystically encourage me to live a little bit longer because I had that contract that I need to keep going, and keep going. I hope someday my stuff will be looked at with a little more seriousness than it sometimes is, because I can sit down and we can go through these and I can show you a bunch of stuff that people are missing, and it's not their fault. But I hope some of it's looked at, and it's looked at maybe more seriously than it is. Also, I tell my family, when they go through my stuff, don't throw anything away without looking at it. If it looks like it's just an empty envelope with scribbling on it, don't throw it away. I've got lots and lots of notes and partial poems and stuff that my family needs to find. And I don't consider myself a great poet and won't be remembered as a great poet. What I do is I react to stuff around me by using the form of poetry, and it works for a lot of people. But I don't ever sit down and say, it's been quite a while since I've written a poem. I think I'll do this. Something happens first, and I don't need prompts. The concept of getting prompts is fine, but I don't get prompts because that's going to force things out. Something happens, and then my way of responding that gives me satisfaction and seems to be accepted by a certain number of people is to put that in a poetic form. So I'm not out here advertising to be a great poet with great poetry, but I do have a way of responding to things that might be of interest to people through the poetic form. But I hope it also shows people that they can do it too. That they can do it too. I'm not here because I'm doing something that hardly anybody can do. And that's really a fun thing about the Scissortail Festival and so many others, is it brings you around all of these other people that are typically sitting in their room by themselves going over stuff. And while that doesn't, I like that part, because every now and then I'll say, hey, that's not bad. Hey. But it's nice to be around other people who are doing the same thing. So I have more fun being at a writers' festival than I would be at a festival of swimsuit contestants because my endorphins are more likely to be popping at the writer.
You found the right place.
This is where I want to be, and this is who I want to be around, and this is a cool place, and it's just begun. And my reading, this is a 3-day festival. My reading has been completed. I'm just going to have fun. I haven't eaten today. Has nothing to do with you, but I don't want to eat before I read. I just can't do it. Today and tomorrow, I can eat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Was there anything else that you wanted to talk about or mention?
I don't know. We went over our 50 minutes, didn't we?
Oh, it's not.
Yeah.
There's no deadline. There's no time limit in oral history. That's the good news. That's what's so great about it.
Two people who have really supported my work, Ben Myers, Janetta Mish. Janetta's the poet laureate, Ben passed. And they're not just fantastic poets. They're fantastic poets who see it as their role to encourage other people to become good. And so they have, when they, I saw Ben Myers about a month ago and walked past him, and we're on Facebook together. And I think it's just 5 words. We passed by. He said, I enjoy what you're doing. And it was obvious he meant my posts about my poetry on Facebook. And we just kept walking. He said, I enjoy what you're doing. That was so cool.
Yeah.
That was so cool. And so I like, I'm a self-promoter. I like to have my name tied. I hope people like my work, and I don't mind having my name tied with it. When I don't publish new poems on Facebook anymore. You don't do that because that's considered publication, and journals won't take it. That's considered being published. So, but if they've been printed somewhere, then you can put it on Facebook so more readers get it, and then just say on there what magazine it was on there and all. But just to give you an example of my style and what I'm about, so I put those poems on there. I put a poem, probably one every 3 days or so, but I call it a Bill McCloud poem.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just me. That's part of the deal of what I'll do about self-promotion and things. I want people to associate my name with the poetry, but I want people to also hear the name so much that at some point they start thinking, is he somebody? Now, the danger is other people are going to see it and get sick of it, and there's a negative effect. But I want to go into people's subconscious. So all of
That's a great goal. I love that.
all of my poems are Bill McCloud poems. And so I'll put it up there, and I'll put the title, and then I'll write a Bill McCloud poem, or a Bill McCloud poem as published in. So that's on Facebook. Nope, I'm winding down.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time. It's been such a pleasure.
Thank you.
I appreciate you.
Thank you.